All right, so 1950s America. 1950s America. Let me see if this is recording. I think it is. I am recording. All right. 1950s America. This is our final day of the Cold War notes. We got a decent amount of stuff to cover here, but I think we'll be able to get through it relatively quickly. Some of this stuff, again, I think is pretty interesting. Things like the Red Scare. I know we've already talked about that a decent amount, so we won't spend too much time talking about McCarthyism. We got the baby boom, suburbia, things like the interstate highway. Love that, right? Media, television, rock and roll. The scary youth who are always out doing drugs and having sex, and everybody's afraid of the youth at this time, right? So you're just terrified of the youth if you're anybody who's moderately old at all during this time. Like, God forbid anybody listens to Elvis Presley or like any of the other artists during the time. So you're going to have that going on as well. Popular culture, you'll see a bunch of things kind of arising, things like television, air conditioning, the nuclear family, which I find kind of hilarious to see the way that we go from World War II, Rosie the Riveter, we can do it for women. And then all of a sudden we're like, now back to the house, right? And that's kind of what we're going to see is like how to be a model housewife, right? All this other kind of crazy stuff that you see of the different gender roles and stereotypes and gender norms that play a huge role at this time. But before we get to that, we do have some more kind of, dramatic, depressing things with the Cold War, things like the nuclear arsenal expanding, Truman ordering the Atomic Energy Commission to develop a new bomb. Atom bomb wasn't enough. Truman's like, let's go bigger, right? So let's get the hydrogen bomb, the H bomb. If you remember that kind of political cartoon that we saw with the two guys, Kennedy and Gorbachev sitting on a bomb, they had an H on it, right? So that's the new development. It's 1,000 times more powerful than the atom bomb, and it restores the U.S.'s advantage. However, right, so remember with the nuclear arms race, it's not just about who has the most, it's also about, like, who has, like, the best. So H-bomb comes in. Eventually, obviously, the Soviets are going to come out and have some better bombs as well. 1952, we have the first H-bomb. At the same time, though, this leads to an arms race. Truman's like, our bomb's bigger now. And then the Soviets are like, all right, I guess we'll make a bigger one. And then it goes back and forth for a period of time. This also feeds into mutually assured destruction, as we know. Does anybody remember what mutually assured destruction is? Any takers? What is it?
If you start anything, we're both going down.
I just spilled coffee all over me. How did that even happen? Is it on my mask? This is it. I quit, right? This is the day. Yes. If you start something, I love that that's gonna be on the recording too, every time. If you start something, you start a fight, you better blow us up all the way, because if you don't, we're gonna start launching a bunch of nukes back at you. Whatever, if you have your H-bomb, we have a decent amount in our arsenal as well. So it's this back and forth of you launch a nuke, we launch all of our nukes, you launch all of your nukes, and then it's gonna be a big mess, right? If one uses the bomb, the other country will destroy the other. We also have the Red Scare. Red Scare is still a big thing. Evidence is actually found indicating that the Soviet Union is attempting to infiltrate the U.S. and Canada. This is going to feed into things like McCarthyism, right? McCarthy getting all of that power by coming out and basically saying, I know who all the communists are. Trust me, re-elect me, do all this stuff for me to get a political advantage. And Americans are fearing that communists are going to try and overthrow the government. This is a huge fear. This is where all that paranoia of your neighbor comes from, looking over your shoulder all the time, watching what you do. This also sparks a lot of nationalism, whether it's out of fear of communism or whether it's out of just fear of being persecuted, maybe. And then you have the loyalty review program, which is created to screen all federal employees. This leads to a lot more tension, right? People are getting scared again. It actually begins when this guy, Igor Gouzenko, he turns in these documents revealing a massive effort by the Soviet Union to infiltrate organizations and government agencies in the U.S. and Canada. Obviously, if that's happening in Canada, we're also worried because we share a border. In this program here, it makes a lot of people very wary, right? Because it seemed to confirm their fears that communists had infiltrated the government. And then on top of that, people are just scared that they're going to get falsely accused, okay? A person could become a suspect for doing things like reading certain books. If you're reading any Russian literature during this time, you might want to get rid of it. if you're reading the Communist Manifesto, probably hide it very well, right? Belonging to certain groups, traveling overseas, or even watching like foreign films. You're not watching Bollywood at this time. I don't even know if that's a thing during the time, but you're not watching that. Even if it's a foreign film of that area, wherever it might be, you have to be like very America, right? And if you're not, then you're running a risk of falling into this loyalty review program, okay? We also have the Red Hunters. There's these government employees who search for communists inside and outside the government. We talked about before the House Un-American Committee, which is that House committee in the House of Representatives. They held hearings for people suspected of communist affiliation. This gets into the whole McCarthyism thing as well. Being a government employee during this time was probably pretty sketchy in some ways. It was probably very tense. It's spreading, right? Red Scare is spreading. People are really fearing communism infiltrating the United States. And we want some names. We want to start naming people. We want to hold somebody accountable. You have things like churches, universities, businesses, unions. It goes pretty deep, all beginning to hold their investigations as well. Loyalty reviews in a church. Can you imagine, right? Thanks for your offering. And also, are you a communist? Right? So some stuff like that. The University of California required loyalty oaths, which is something I can't even imagine you would see today. But, you know, things are a little bit crazier during this time. Loyalty oaths. And then on top of that, 157 people are refusing to take these oaths, and they're fired, right? That might fall into some issues today, again, of whether or not there would be a wrongful termination. But back during this time, you're getting away with a lot of this stuff because it is a genuine, serious fear that a lot of people are having. So you have a lot of that going on. Partially, things like that probably spark reform and job, rights and duties as well. But yeah, that's kind of what's going on with all these red hunters, and it's a scary name in itself, right? We have the infiltrators, right? People who do get involved. You have this diplomat, Alger Hiss. He's convicted for sharing secret documents from the State Department. Klaus Fuchs, the scientist convicted for sharing atomic bomb secrets. The guy who's pretty responsible for leaking a lot of those things. And then you have the Rosenbergs, who we talked about very briefly. His wife, Ethel, seen as likely very less guilty than maybe the other Rosenberg, right? With that, they're convicted of sharing nuclear intelligence with the Soviets. And this is a big deal because it's like a public execution, right? They both get the electric chair, and they're publicly executed for treason and espionage and all this other stuff. And it's another reason why people are going to look at this, and it's going to spark more fear. Because now we have somebody to hold accountable. And then on top of that, when we did hold them accountable, they got the death penalty. So if you do end up in a loyalty review situation, you're probably going to be pretty worried, okay? Now, we remember blacklisting, right? Does anybody remember what blacklisting is without staring at it too much? What does it mean to blacklist somebody?
Under watch by the FBI.
Yeah, under watch, or you're on some sort of watch program. You get the FBI watch list today. Even I saw some Twitter meme about it the other day, or TikTok. I don't remember what it was. But yeah, it's a watch list. Okay, so Americans in the media were blacklisted for their affiliation with communism. That can include things like getting denied jobs. It includes people like Charlie Chaplin, of all people, right? He's got maybe some roots in socialism. He denied being a communist. There was no hard proof of Charlie Chaplin being a communist during the time, but you do see a large amount of blacklisting in Hollywood. He denied being a communist. Instead, he claimed that he was a peacemonger, right? You have Langston Hughes, not actually a communist, but his poetry was used by the Communist Party. So if you're affiliated at all with communism, even if you are not intentionally affiliated, you may end up being blacklisted, or you may end up kind of in this situation. There's Charlie Chaplin. Does anybody know Charlie Chaplin? Probably. Yeah, like a famous, silent movie, old black and white movie, guy with the kind of like a mustache, right? His iconic mustache. We also have the McCarran Act, 1950, forced communists to register in America, which again, if you're communist, you might be proud, but if you're in that situation, are you going to come forth and be like, yeah, I'm a communist, I'm going to register with the Attorney General? And what the McCarran Act does is it limits their rights. Truman actually looks at this and he vetoes it. He vetoes the bill. This is a part of presidential power. He can look at this bill and kind of overturn it, but then it goes back down to Congress, and Congress overrules him and overturns the veto. That's a good example of checks and balances. It declared that world communism has a sole purpose of the establishment of a totalitarian dictatorship in America, right? Whether or not that is the sole purpose or the actual case, that is the argument or justification that's being used there. Communists wouldn't be allowed to obtain passports or travel abroad. And in case of a national emergency, they could be detained or arrested, much like we detained and arrested Japanese Americans during the attack on Pearl Harbor in the subsequent years. And you would be giving up these by registering, right? You would be turning over your rights, essentially. Truman didn't want to punish people for their beliefs, even communists. And that probably played a role in the fact that he wasn't that well liked by Americans. Again, nationalism at an all-time high, Truman being seen as somebody who's not really doing enough, the worry of the Cold War losing, us losing ground in the Cold War, that's always playing a role here too. And, eventually Eisenhower takes over and he's like real tough on communism, uses brinksmanship and all that stuff. So this is maybe his vetoing and his stance on this might have a role to play in his kind of, polling in the United States and his approval at the time. Congress also starts hunting communists. Again, the House of Representatives creating that House of Un-American Activities Committee, investigating possible subversive activities by fascists, Nazis, communists. They target the movie industry, 1947. The group of group of left-wing writers, directors, and producers. This is the Hollywood 10. Okay, so this is what's going on here. We're moving out from just, those in your government. Now we're looking at those in the media. We'll look at those who are creating films, those who are creating music, those who are creating poetry. And you see a lot more people being persecuted. And that just further spreads the fear, right? That further fuels the fire. Then you get leading into the idea of like, well, what if I'm viewing some material that's created by a communist and I don't even know it, right? And then you get people boycotting Hollywood and all other sorts of kind of maybe irrational fears at the time as well. The Hollywood 10 are charged with contempt, right, in court. It's just kind of a big deal during the time. Hollywood's kind of a big kind of target during the Red Scare for sure, okay? With that, we got this primary source, Senator Joe McCarthy. We know him, right? He says, well, I cannot take the time to name all the men in the State Department, shocker, who have been named as members of the Communist Party and members of the spy ring. I have here in my hand a list of 205 that were known by the Secretary of State as being members of the Communist Party and who nevertheless are still working and shaping the policy of the State Department. Looking at this and looking at this primary source, how do you guys think Americans reacted to McCarthy's speech? What do you think Americans said? I think their reaction was to this.
Show us the list.
Maybe show us the list, right? What else? What else maybe? Anything else? You got a guy come up and he's like, I know of 205 communists literally in your government. What's the reaction?
Don't trust the government.
Maybe don't trust the government in some ways, right? Maybe outrage, fear, right? Again, also people wanting others to be held accountable. So that gets back to the idea of show us the list. As we know with McCarthy and as we've talked about, he didn't really have a real list. He's censured eventually. He loses all of his credibility, but he does use this as like a tool, right? A political tool, and it does help him get reelected. Prior to this, he wasn't really well known. Okay, he wasn't really well known before that. He accused his opponent in the 1946 Senate election of being a communist, and that absolutely helped him win. So it was more of a political gap than anything else. The next big thing that we run into is facing the bomb. I always find this to be interesting as well, because I can't imagine how powerful, right, the people of the United States, how, as awful as it might be, how on top of the world you might feel wielding this incredibly destructive device such as the atomic bomb following World War II. Look at our weapons, right? We have this. All of a sudden, 1949, the Soviets developed their own, and it's pandemonium, right? It's fear. Americans are preparing to survive a potential nuclear attack from the Soviet Union. So I'm sure that there was a weird in-between period where it's like, yeah, we got the bomb, like, whatever, right? And then all of a sudden the Soviets get it, and it's like, oh, they have the bomb, right? Now who's on the other side of the scope? Us. Okay, so we have things like fallout shelters. It's predicted that every person that dies from a nuclear attack, 4 more would later die from fallout, right? Radiation. If we knew Indianapolis in this class, right? And you saw the radiation that kind of falls out, the way that wind can carry all of that stuff forward. If you know anything about Chernobyl, all of the kind of the bad effects that can come from radiation as well, things like increased rate of cancer, birth defects, all the kind of crazy stuff that can come from fallout. So that is something to keep in mind. We also have schools designating special areas as bomb shelters and had students practice routine bomb drills, much in the way that you guys practice things like school shooting drills. This is the school shooting drills of the time, all right? We watched Duck and Cover, didn't we? Bert the Turtle, duck and cover, right? Just duck and cover and you'll be fine. Not really that realistic, but it's way more comforting to have a plan than to be like, if you see a bomb, good luck, right? It's not going to go that way. So they did have like a plan in place. Whether or not that plan would have actually worked, probably not.
They used to teach you in schools during the Cold War, you stuck your hand all the way out, put your thumb like that. If the mushroom cloud was bigger than your thumb and you could still see it, that means you're too close.
Better start running or get in the car then, right? Yes, absolutely. And we talked about too with that big bomb that we did the simulation. There are some bombs that are big enough to be dropped on Indianapolis that you and I here in Bloomington would still have 3rd-degree burns. So good luck ducking and covering if you are in anywhere near the kind of the vicinity of the bomb right there. So that is something to keep in mind as well. Families also built backyard fallout shelters, stocked them with canned foods. I think I mentioned this before, but IU itself had like a fallout shelter in like nearly every single university building. There's news articles that you can find dating back to the 60s where students actually did like social experiments and stayed in the shelters for 2 weeks. The one that I read, they tried to stay in it for about 2 weeks and people started, bickering and going back and forth, probably because they're college students. And also on top of that, like a pipe burst or something. So there's a bunch of problems that could come with potentially staying in a fallout shelter, especially because a lot of these are like hastily built. Okay, they're hastily built and they're built out of fear, but people find comfort in having some sort of backup plan. Here's some examples. We did watch that episode of The Twilight Zone with the fallout shelter. So some of the stuff you guys are familiar with, beds, canned goods, non-perishable things, sometimes behind like a big metal hatch, oftentimes underground as well, looking to maybe stop the spread of fallout or radiation, which is kind of a big thing that many people still don't understand during this time. Water, all the other kind of things you would have, air ventilation systems. Sometimes people put them in their basements. Sometimes they're behind multiple layers of walls. With this, has anybody ever seen the newest Cloverfield movie? Anybody seen that? Yeah, there's like a really new one. Either way, it's a weird movie, but if you've never seen it, that one, the guy has a fallout shelter, but it's like for the end of the world. So I don't know. If you ever get a chance, maybe watch that because I think it does a really good depiction of like what a fallout shelter might look like, especially in modern time. People still do have fallout shelters. Has anybody ever seen doomsday preppers? It's a thing, right? So yeah, there is still fear today that a nuclear weapon attack could happen, but it is significantly less than it was in the past. This is Bert the Turtle, if you remember our good friend. 1950s by the numbers. U.S. population, right? 151,684,000. Obviously, that has gone up by about double or more by now. Life expectancy, women would live to be about 71, men about 65. Again, that's something that has risen as well. Average salary, $2,992. Doesn't sound like a lot. Think about inflation. And also think about the price of things back then. A loaf of bread was 14 cents. So, you can see where those things kind of come together. Labor force, you have 5 men for every 2 women, which is, again, it's interesting to me. It's kind of funny to see how we go from, we can do it, women in the workplace, and then all of a sudden the 1950s roll around and we've got the nuclear family and it's more like men are the bread makers and women are the housewives, and that's the homemakers, right? That's what they're usually called, and that's kind of the direction that it goes. The GI Bill of Rights, War vets are given unemployment benefits while looking for a job. So we're out here kind of looking after our vets after they come home from the war. They get tuition for college, things like home loans, and that leads to a lot of prosperity. That's also going to feed into things like the baby boom. People are getting homes. People are settling down. They're coming back from the war. They miss their wives or their girlfriends or whoever. And they begin to, some people feeling like, man, I've got a second chance at life after all the carnage and horrible things that I've experienced. Why not, right? Settle down and start my family. We also have highways being built, which is something that like people don't realize is a relatively recent thing, this being like a big infrastructural change. And part of the reason is because of that whole nuclear attack thing. It's a big worry of like, how are we going to get away, right? If the bomb is dropped and we need to get away, where do we go? Without a decent infrastructure, it might be difficult. So the plan with this is to eliminate unsafe roads. It's not the whole reason, but it's definitely part of it. The plan with this is to eliminate unsafe roads, inefficient routes, traffic jams, all the other things that got in the way of a speedy, safe transcontinental travel. In case of atomic attack on our key cities, the road would permit quick evacuation of target cities and areas. That is probably like a really big justification during the time, especially any times that you can use the things that people are afraid of to justify your spending. That is something that you're probably going to do as well. So that is brought up. Federal Aid Highway Act of 1944 had authorized the construction of a 40,000-mile national system of interstate highways. So this is where a lot of these things come from in the late 40s and the 50s. I'm still in the vein of I think it would be really cool to see like a transcontinental like railroad. I think that would be pretty neat. Anybody else? It'd be cool to get on a train in Indiana and end up in California or something.
That would be sick.
Yeah, it would be pretty neat. We also have car culture is a big thing. With the inclusion of highways, people are also getting cars. Now you have somewhere to drive. You have a place to go. You're not going to get stuck in a traffic jam every single time. Cars are getting faster. There's more innovation. There's innovation in mass production of vehicles, so vehicles become more readily accessible. The interstate highway, right? We have luxurious cars, things with colors and fins. Drive-in movie theaters. Anybody ever been to one? They're really fun. If you haven't been to one, go to one. There's one like 30 minutes away, I think. Right? Is that the one that you guys go to? Is that what it is? Yeah. There's one. I have one in my hometown, actually.
7 or 8 years.
Yeah, I actually worked with fast food, McDonald's. I worked in a drive-in restaurant for a little while when I was like 16. It was like my first job. And people would drive their cars up like Sonic, right? Where you drive up and you'd have like a woman, or usually at my job, the workers were still relatively old school, so it was like always girls on like roller skates. They didn't let me wear the roller skates, right? They didn't want, I guess I wasn't good enough in the outfit, who knows, right? So I was just the guy who did the French fries. So the French fries and the hot dogs. But people would pull up in their cars and they would have people bring out food to them and they'd eat food in their cars. And that's something that you're seeing here too. Fast food, motels, Holiday Inn being established. Why motels? Well, because now people are traveling. They're moving around. You're in a car. You're having an easier time getting across, especially the interstate highway. You're traveling state to state. This brings in a lot of tourism. Living in the suburbs becomes more popular. You have that going on. And then you also have, hello? Sure. Sonia, can you go to the LGI? Thank you. So with this, and I'll have this recorded and stuff, and if you don't get it, then I'll send you the copy of the notes. Sure. So living in the suburbs becomes more popular. Why do you think? What for? What do you guys think? More space, right? Getting away from the sprawling cities. What else? Exactly. It's the same thing with like the fact that my dad lives in Chesterton, Indiana, Northwest Indiana. It's about an hour from Chicago, 45 minutes or so. He lives there, but he works in Chicago. His thought process being, I'd rather be somewhere that is a bit farther away from the city. Property costs are lower. It's not as crowded, right? And that's the same thought process that is kind of happening here. We can live 30 minutes away from the city. We can raise our family in a place with more space in between the homes. And you often see those images back in the day of big yards and plenty of space in between the homes, where in a city, you might have literally a house on top of another house, right? So that is definitely a thing. We have the first TV commercial. Let's take a look at this.
Where did you say you lived again?
We live in Chesterton, Indiana.
Is that closer to Gary or Lafayette?
It's closer to Gary. So it's like 20, I'm going to 25, 30 minutes from Gary. This is the first commercial, right? First ever TV ad.
Runs on bullet time.
If only they were that short now, right? That would be great. Now they're like 60 seconds of commercial. With that, the reason why it's like such a new thing, right? Oh my gosh, I'm one of those teachers. Here we go. I'm like every college professor I ever had now. The reason why it's such a new thing, obviously, is because the TV is just coming out. It's just coming out, and that technology is just being kind of created. There's a bunch of different examples, like the suburbs. Like I said, very uniform kind of situation. So you can see everybody has a lawn, front yard, backyard, fitting plenty of people in these areas. But still, this is more space. Even if you're fitting a lot of people here, this is probably more space than you'd ever have in the city. Holiday Inns, right? The interstate highways, McDonald's. Okay, nowadays we have like drive-thrus and stuff. I don't remember or know exactly if they had drive-thrus right away. They probably did. Who knows? Maybe they didn't. I'm not sure. Does anybody know? I'm not a huge McDonald's guy, so I'm not caught up on the entire history of McDonald's. I do know that it used to be less expensive. That's the big thing, right? Little pink houses for you and me. Big song that's kind of out in the day. It's like a slogan, right? Moving to the suburbs, starting your nuclear family, the male breadwinner, husband, the housemaker wife, the children, right? Little Billy and Timmy or whatever they were probably named back then. Sears, right? Consumer culture is a big thing. Honey, what can we buy today, right? We have our salary of $2,000. This dryer is only $10. So there's a bunch of stuff that people are looking to buy. Magazines become a big thing. Reading through magazines, ads in magazines. What is this? Hot Point electric stove right here. So you have an oven that people are trying to sell. You've got secretaries look, right? So you have, has anybody ever seen Mad Men? You have that. If women are in the workplace, they're often, again, in a lot of gender role specific areas, secretaries, right? You have what the Tide's got what women want. And it's specifically looking at doing things like the homemakers, gender role again. Washing clothes. With this, why does Dodge ride so much smoother than other cars? This is something that you wouldn't have seen before, right? Cars are becoming more easily accessible. A lawnmower, a vacuum cleaner, all these different things, something to sweep or wax your floors. All this stuff is kind of coming together. You got things like electric washing machines, dryers, refrigerators, supermarkets being a big thing. Customers can buy everything from milk to mops. Shopping centers, television is a big thing. This is purchased in record numbers. 1946 is about 6,000 sets. By 1953, there are about 7 million TV sets. That's going to lead to things like news in your home or television shows, Dick Van Dyke and all this other stuff. Some more examples. You're starting to clean up fast these days, says the husband, Mr. and Mrs. These days, I'm using a fast cleanser, one that doesn't leave dirt catching scratches. So you can see all of the kind of stereotypes that are rising during this time. And again, I think this is it's really kind of interesting and borderline funny to see how much we're championing women's equality during the time where we need women in factories. And then as soon as that time ends, it's like, all right, back to the way it was. And so that's, potentially a downfall. But with that being said, you will still see with a lot of women getting, access to more equality during that time, this is going to lead to more tension, right? And we'll talk about that in a moment. Like I said before, buying all these different things, television, purchased in record numbers. End of the decade, 90% of the households had televisions. So I never experienced old school television, but I even remember back in my day, and you guys probably do as well. Because do you guys remember having box TVs? Anybody? Yeah. We're not away from that yet, right? Soon, one day, I'm going to be talking to a class and be like, do you guys remember box TVs? And they're be like, no. Because it seems to me that television is flying. It is flying by very quickly. It's like how advanced it's getting.
4K?
4K to 8K now.
Yeah. So cheap nowadays.
I know. It's like one day. I remember when 4K first came out. I remember when they had like those 3D Sony TVs and all this stuff, and it felt like televisions were so expensive for a short period of time. And nowadays, you could get like a 50-inch TV for $200, and it would be a nice one, even if it's off brand or whatever.
It
But
was just like 3 or 4 years ago. Any size 4K TV would be like $2,000-$3,000.
yeah, and then 600 or so, and then the price just keeps on dropping. So that's interesting to see how it goes. You still see that as well. So if you're starting off in 1946, it's probably pretty expensive to get TV then. As soon as they start to get mass marketed, mass produced, just like cars, it's a lot more accessible. Buy now, pay later, right? We have the first credit card in 1950. This is at the Diners Club, okay? Buy now, pay later. 1958, you have the Amex, the American Express. That's a credit card that's around even today, something that you'll see. So you have like the account number, their name on it, right? And a credit card is basically, does anybody here have a credit card? It's good. I didn't get one for so long because my parents were afraid of me having one for whatever reason. Get a credit card when you go to college, at least. Get a student credit card. Start building up your credit because it is important. But with this, yeah, this is like it's a system of, borrowing and then paying back, basically. Okay, and then if you don't pay back in time, sometimes with interest. But that gives a lot of people more spending power. Okay, that's what it does. It gives a lot of people more spending power. It leads to things like more leisure time than ever before. You have the 40-hour work week. There's vacation as well. You have labor-saving devices like washing machines, dishwashers, lawnmowers. You might have spent 2 hours mowing your lawn before. Now maybe it's only an hour, right? You might have spent 3 hours washing your dishes, or not 3 hours, but an hour washing your dishes. You might have spent 2 hours washing your clothes. Those things are definitely drastically moved back now. You don't have to worry about that as much if you can afford it, which most people could during this time. Participation in things like sports, fishing, bowling, hunting, golf. All these things increase. Again, that's part of having more leisure time. It's also part of having more money. More people watch sports on television. That leads to a bigger market there. Americans become avid readers, things like Reader's Digest, Sports Illustrated. This is going to lead to something like, more marketing in sports, like I said. So baseball becoming bigger, football becoming bigger, especially on television. The Sun Belt, you have the region of the United States generally considered to stretch across the South with mild winter, frequent sunny skies, and growing economic opportunities. So you have many people moving to the Sun Belt during this time as well. You have the suburban living, right? Typical TV suburban families. This is what you're modeling your home off of. I don't want to be like the Donna Reed show or Leave It to Beaver or Father Knows Best. And you'll see a large amount of typical gender norm stereotypes in this as well. It's going to be kind of modeled after the nuclear family that we've been talking about. We also have babies, a lot of them. So many babies, okay? The baby boom, it increased the rate of babies being born from 1945 to 1960. As we've talked about, there is the increased quality of life in the 1950s. People are finally like, maybe it's time. Things are going well. The war is over. People are coming back. You got a new shot at life. You got, you're back reunited with your family, and you have a boom. This is a graph showing kind of all the millions of babies and births that are happening during this time. You can see a sharp uprising, peaks down a little bit, and then again, uprising again. Did I go too fast? You guys get it? Good. This is just another graph showing, again, in 40, obviously, a lot of men away. And then when they come back, 45, you come back from the war, and babies are rising, right? Baby booming. We also have the ideal family, the nuclear family. This is a household consisting of a mother, a father, their children. They are the backbone of American society. Women were considered to be the role of the homemaker, men being the role of the housemaker. The breadwinner. You got the woman up here. They're coming for lunch. We're in a jam. He says, keep cool. Just open up a can of Spam. This is what ads were like back then. Women don't leave the kitchen, literally says this article right here. And then you have, so the harder a wife works, the cuter she looks. You mean a woman can open it? What is that, ketchup? So you can see all this kind of crazy stuff that comes together of like, again, it's amazing to me how far we went from Rosie the Riveter to, look at, you think Rosie the Riveter is going to have a hard time opening up a bottle of ketchup? She's jacked, right? There's no way. Now, you move on to these ads in the 50s. You mean a woman can open it? for a bottle of ketchup. We had people building airplanes before, working in factories, doing very demanding work, and all of a sudden we've kind of found ourselves going back to this. The Good Housewives Guide, right? Let's take a look at this really quick. Go open. Of course not. Maybe we could read on this. Prepare yourself. Take 15 minutes to rest so you'll be refreshed when he comes home. Touch up your makeup. Put a ribbon in your hair. Be fresh looking. He has just been done with a lot of work, right? And it's just kind of discounting all the work that women are also doing all day. If they are in that role of preparing the house, taking care of children, and this is something that you see today even, right? Stay-at-home mothers not really being given the credit that they probably deserve. Be happy to see him. What if she has a bad day, right? So it kind of discounts a lot of that stuff. Greet him with a warm smile and show sincerity in your desire to please him. Listen to him. What about her, right? Instead, you don't have like a good husband's guide that's kind of circulating as much. You may have one, but that's probably not going to be as on the head and as on like, what can you do for them as much, right? You guys see how this is a little wild, right? So you can see the differences in the way that things are going there as well. Youth culture, watch out for them, okay? Watch out for the youth. They're becoming more independent and rebellious. God forbid they listen to rock and roll. It's scandalous to adults. Don't listen to Elvis Presley, right? Chuck Berry, Muddy Waters, Little Richard, Bo Diddley, Ray Charles, Hank Williams. Ray Charles, right? Don't listen to Ray Charles. Watch out. It's too scandalous for your children. We have the Beatniks. They're challenging society and conformity. Nat King Cole, Little Richard, all these different artists who are coming together. Maybe they're singing about things like romance, right? Maybe they're singing about, I don't know, having fun with their friends, but that's too much. That's too much. This is also the big time where, if you're able to drive or you're able to get around more, teens are getting more freedom, right, in the household. They're getting more freedom to go to things like the mall and go hang out with their friends. So you have like a big fear. And alongside the Red Scare, there's also like this youth scare, right? The terrifying youth and their crime and their all the bad things that they're doing. So you have that as definitely a big kind of factor during this time. Here's some Elvis Presley.
This unforgettable vacation memory. It didn't actually begin here. This memory.
This is Elvis Presley on the Ed Sullivan Show. Teenage heartthrob Elvis Presley. I think so, yeah. They added chorus into it. I love that movie. It's a great movie. You can hear all the girls in the crowd too, right? Nowadays you got Harry Styles, and you used to have Justin Bieber. He's past his prime though. But yeah, Elvis was like the Justin Bieber of his time, right? Obviously more rock and roll than anything though. Like I said though, there's social tensions. It's difficult for women to go from being a central role in the workforce and having way more equality and rights during the time of war to then be pushed back into the house and brushed under the rug like that very quickly. So women are pushing for more rights. You have African Americans also pushing for more rights and breaking down some barriers. And this is kind of leading us into the civil rights movement in the 60s. With that, you have somebody like Jackie Robinson breaking the color barrier in baseball, ended up being the Rookie of the Year in 1947. Has anybody ever seen the movie 42, I think it is?
Yeah.
Really good movie. I forget who plays. Is that Chadwick Boseman? Who plays him? Is that who it is? Yeah. Really solid movie. If you get a chance, maybe watch that as well. It goes through a lot of the things that Jackie Robinson dealt with, the discrimination, the refusal to play him in some aspects, and the various kind of barriers that you had to go through in order for this to happen. You also have Native Americans, and this is something that's always been going on, but it's also happening here again with reservations. If you've ever heard of anything about like Native American like reform schools, it's pretty horrific stuff. Looking at the way that Native Americans are treated, just the fact that you have plenty of Native Americans being put into these schools where they go in with their culture and they come out afraid to even express any of their culture, sometimes beaten for speaking their language, so much to the point where many of them forget how to speak it. It's just kind of some crazy stuff, and I wish we had more time to talk about that. Maybe we will in the future. But yeah, there's a lot of disservice to Native Americans and indigenous people during the time, even today, obviously. This is still kind of an issue that's going on. Even today, an issue with African Americans being discriminated against and women. So these are social tensions that are beginning to be more prominent during the time, but obviously, as we know and we see even in the year 2020, there's still plenty of work to be done here. As far as African Americans go, 1954, Brown v. Board of Education comes through. This, you have this separate educational facilities for Black children were inherently unequal. Has anybody ever heard of separate but equal? Yeah. The idea here is that there is no such thing as separate but equal. The separation there in itself is inherently unequal. You also find that Black children will be put into other schools than white children, and they wouldn't have nearly as many educational opportunities, books. Sometimes they wouldn't have as many supplies, or their curriculum was not as well catered, and things of that nature that are just kind of happening where it's a big inequality in the area during the time. Brown v. Board kind of goes against that. Brown v. Board stops separate but equal, and then this is said to be the ruling was the first nail in Jim Crow's coffin with the Jim Crow era laws. But even today, you'll see in the news like, this is a Jim Crow era law. And so there's still some things that are stuck around that need to be reformed as well. December 1955, Montgomery activist named Rosa Parks, we all know Rosa, was arrested for refusing to give her seat on a city bus to a white person. Her arrest sparked a 13-month boycott of the city buses by Black citizens. One of the big things that you'll see with nonviolent protests oftentimes is hit them where it hurts, which usually is the money, right? The pockets. Acts of nonviolent resistance like the boycott helped shape the civil rights movement for the next decade, right? And you have people like Martin Luther King coming in. You have the other side with Malcolm X as well, and all the different kind of civil rights activists and, March to Selma, bus boycotts and diner boycotts and sit-ins and other different movements that happened during this time as well. And that's something that I think our next unit may be the civil rights movement. So that might be the next thing that we're talking about. So that is where we'll leave off today. That is all we have for notes. There is the assignment on Canvas. If you guys can get to it, just take the rest of class today, the last 25 minutes or so, to look at it. If you don't want to work on it today and you have something else to work on, that is okay, but do make sure you get it done when you get a chance. All right.